So today I want to talk about the Oedipus myth because it's weird. I remember being introduced to it in graduate school and it seemed totally irrelevant, entirely antiquated, and not at all useful. I think I was wrong. I think the way that it was presented to me was superficial. So I want to take a little bit of time here and go through a few of the different interpretations of the Oedipus myth, beginning, of course, with Freud. Interpretations as they pertain to psychology. So I'll be drawing from a few well-known psychologists and discussing what it is that they think the Oedipus myth tells us and how they apply that to their clinical practice. So let's begin with the myth itself for those of you who need a refresher or maybe haven't heard it in its entirety. So the year is 429 BC. Oedipus is born in Thebes. He is born to King Laus and Queen Jocasta. Sorry if I get these names entirely, the pronunciation entirely incorrect. But he's born to them. And Jaresius tells King Laus of a prophecy. He tells him that his son, Oedipus, is going to kill him, Laus, one day, and take the queen, Queen Jocasta, the wife of King Laus. He's going to take Jocasta as his wife. So Oedipus, the son, is going to kill his father and marry his mother. Understandably, his father and mother are horrified at the prospect of that happening, so they pierce the boy's ankles and they leave him in the woods to die. However, a woodcutter saves him, he finds him, he takes him to another land, Corinth, where the boy, Oedipus, is eventually adopted by the king and queen of Corinth. Years later, Oedipus hears of this prophecy. He hears that he is destined to kill his father and marry his mother. Likewise horrified, he decides to leave Corinth and never return. So he heads for Thebes. He goes on the road to Thebes. On the road to Thebes, he meets an arrogant, angry old man. They fight. Oedipus kills him. Turns out that man is his father. Oedipus does not know that yet, but he kills his father, as the prophecy said he would. He continues on the road. He enters Thebes. Thebes is now under control of the Sphinx due to the death of the king. The Sphinx has promised the city to whomever can solve a riddle. He has promised the city and he has promised the hand of the queen to whoever solves the riddle. Oedipus solves the riddle, thus he is given the city and the queen. He marries the queen, therefore he marries his mom. He later learns of this. Years later, he learns that he has murdered his father and that he has married his mother. He's horrified, as is his mother. His mother hangs herself. Oedipus then takes the pins of her dress and he blinds himself. He stabs out his eyes. So that is the myth of Oedipus. Well, Freud saw this, he took this myth and he applied it to the psychology of the human being. He said that the reason this myth resonates or has an emotional impact with so many people the world over is because it points to something universal for humans. It points to a universal struggle or conflict that all humans go through. What he said, quite literally, and this is why it's maybe easily discounted nowadays, especially to the layman, what he said is that little children are filled with incestuous desires. And I'm going to say, I'm going to speak about this from the boy's perspective, as that's how Freud by and large presented it. He wasn't as clear on what the Oedipus myth, how it played out for the girl. So let's say the boy. He's filled with incestuous desire for his mother. He directs his libido towards his mother. He desires her. He desires her quite literally sexually. He wants her for himself. He wants her sexually for himself. Um, well, there's a third party most of the time, unfortunately, for that little boy. That's the father. So what happens is there's a triangle here. Once the father is introduced, there's now a triangle, and the little boy feels jealousy, feels rivalry with the father because the father threatens the little boy's dominion of his mother, access to his mother. So the little boy wants to defeat the father and claim his mother for his own. Again, sexually, as Freud had it. Freud said that a healthy resolution to the Oedipal complex is that the father asserts his authority, asserts his rightful ownership of his wife, of the boy's mother, and asserts his authority. He steps in between the boy and the boy's wishes and the mother and the boy's wishes for the mother. And at that point, what would ideally happen is that the boy would come to identify with his father. He would internalize the masculine, internalize, as Freud had it, conventional morality. By identifying with his father, the boy chooses to comply with the social order, with social rules, chooses to internalize the masculine. So for another take on the Oedipus complex, perhaps a more modern one, I'm going to turn to the psychoanalyst and great writer and teacher on psychoanalytic concepts, Don Carveth, who has a wonderful, very thorough video on the Oedipus complex. Highly recommend you watch it. I will link it below. But just as a little introduction. So he agrees with Freud to a point. He agrees that this is a universal myth. In other words, it's a universal complex. It has universal significance, psychological significance for all humans in all places at all times. As we'll see in a little bit here, other thinkers don't agree. But that's Don's take. So he's with Freud to that point. However, he then takes a more Lacanian view of the myth, which is to say a more perhaps metaphorical view of the myth. He sees it as unfortunate that Freud instinctualized the conflict, that Freud turned it into a libidinal issue, a sexual drive or sexual instinct issue. He biologized it. Meaning, just to say what I said before, that he thought it was quite literally the sexual impulse, the libido, the energy being directed at the mom, and the child wanted to have sex with his mother. So Don, Carveth, Jacques Lacan, they saw that as more of a metaphor. How they view it is that what the boy, or really what the child really wants, is to be the apple of their mother's eye. They want to be that which their mother desires exclusively. They want to be the center of their mother's attention. So clearly that's not just to do with sexual urges, although as biological beings, sexual urges arise, so that might be one aspect of the feelings and of the conflict, but that's not the fundamental issue. The fundamental issue is that I want my mother to want me exclusively. So it's an issue of jealousy because she doesn't, because she has a husband and a life beyond me. And as I grow older, and become more aware that she isn't always there for me at my every beck and call, I have to confront this reality that I am not that which she desires, and certainly not that which she exclusively desires. So that's how my understanding, anyway, of how Don would view this conflict, and Jacques Lacan, um, a jealousy conflict, narcissistic, a conflict of narcissistic origins. Um, I want my mother's attention exclusively, and I can't have it. So there is a rivalry with my father, or perhaps anybody else who sort of steps in the way of me and my mom. Um, Freud, returning to Freud, he saw successful resolution as the father stepping in, the boy identifying with the father, internalizing the masculine code, the social order, the superego. Don sees it differently. I find this quite interesting. Don sees that successful resolution to this conflict is not identification with the father, but finding a way to kill the father symbolically, which effectively means finding a way to move beyond the father, to become somehow more than the father, to surpass the father, and to find a way to unite with the mother, but again, symbolically. Most of us have heard that we marry our own mothers. I mean, that's pointing to this, that we sort of find a way back to our mother, by finding somebody who resembles our mother. And probably the reverse could be said for women. Um, so we successful resolution is symbolically killing the father and symbolically getting the mother. So now I'm going to turn to Erich Fromm, prominent psychologist, sociologist from the 20th century. So Fromm disagrees with Freud on a number of fronts. One, he does not see this as a universal myth. So Don, Carveth, Freud, they do. Fromm, he does not. He does not see this as universal. He sees this as the product of a patriarchal society. So he sees the conflict, he locates the conflict elsewhere. What he sets up is, he says this is a conflict between the patriarchy and the matriarchy. This is a conflict between two different orders, two different world orders. He points out that there was never any sexual attraction on the part of Oedipus towards his mother, whatsoever. She just came with the throne. So not only did he not know she was his mother, but he also wasn't trying to get her in the first place. So he thinks Freud reads into it a little bit too much, that piece of it, a little bit too much, because that's not there. There's no sign of that being there. So he sees the myth not as a symbol of incestuous love between mother and son, or son towards mother, but of the rebellion of the son against the father, against the patriarchy. And that the marriage between Oedipus and Jocasta is purely secondary. Fromm points out that if we read the entirety of the trilogy and not just Oedipus Rex, I haven't, but I read what Fromm had to say about it, is that we are struck by his relation, the relation that Oedipus has with his daughters. He has a son and he has daughters. He relies on his daughters for advice. He turns to his daughters. So Fromm sees that this is him preferring the matriarchal world, which emphasizes the freedom and the happiness of the human being, over and above the patriarchal world, which is the world of the arbitrariness of male rule and law and order. Ultimately, at the end of the trilogy, the patriarchy does remain the victor in terms of power, but their principles are morally defeated, according to Fromm, because the victor, who's Creon, I'm not going into the details of the myth, but the victor, Creon recognizes that he has achieved nothing but death. So again, the primary conflict is between the matriarchal principle and the that sees the equality of all men and respect for human life, really humanism, and the patriarchal principle. So Fromm says that this myth, we would not see this myth in a world where the patriarchy didn't reign supreme. There would be no need for this myth. That's why he doesn't see it as a universal myth. I'm curious. I imagine that Fromm might agree with Don pertaining to the successful resolution of the Oedipus complex. They don't agree that it's universal, and they don't agree that it has the same origins. For Don, it's about jealousy because of the triangle. For Fromm, it's patriarchy versus matriarchy. But I think that they might agree on successful resolution of the complex, because for Don, as I was saying, and as you can see in his video and in his writings, successful resolution is the symbolic killing, i.e., transcending of the father. And here for Fromm, it's overcoming the patriarchy. So, and replacing it in his case with matriarchy. So perhaps they would see, they would both agree that overcoming the father or the patriarchy is successful resolution, but the other side of that, they might have different ideas about what it might look like on the other side. Anyway, that's Erich Fromm's take. Next, we're going to go into Rollo May. So Rollo May has a different take entirely. He has a different take because he emphasizes a different part of the myth, sort of like Freud did. Years after Oedipus ascends to the throne, kills his father, marries his mother, but before he knows that he has done that, there's a terrible drought. And he sends his uncle Creon to Delphi for an answer to this drought. Creon comes back and he tells Oedipus that he must learn who killed the king, who killed King Laus. So Oedipus sets off on a quest to figure out who killed him. Oedipus is actually warned to not continue on the quest because the entity who warned him knows what he's going to find. But in spite of the warning, Oedipus continues. He continues nonetheless. He continues to seek enlightenment concerning essentially and eventually his origins. So he pursues this inquiry even when he gets people telling him to stop. Jocasta at a certain point realizes what he's doing and what he might discover. The truth dawns on her and she encourages him to stop, but he doesn't stop. Jocasta tries to stop him. Rollo May makes note of this. He says that most of us in our hearts, we carry a Jocasta, the part of us that begs us to stop our inquiry for self-knowledge. Rollo May quotes Oedipus saying, "I shall not hesitate, low though it be, to trace the source of me." So to seek truth is to run the risk of discovering what we do not want to see. Most of us do not have the courage to go that far. Most of us would stop before Oedipus stopped. Most of us would heed the warnings, internal or external. Most of us would not have what it takes to confront the truth of who we are. So for Rollo May, this myth is actually pointing to courage, to the terrible beauty of courage, the terrible beauty of truth. It takes unparalleled courage to be willing to face the truth of who we are. Most people don't go there. Oedipus did. So for Rollo May, Oedipus is a hero. So Rollo May doesn't emphasize the jealousy aspect, the libidinal aspect, the patriarchy or the matriarchal aspect. What he emphasizes is the conflict, the internal conflict between the part of us that wants to know and the part of us that is too scared to know. And of course, he sees as triumphant or heroic that part of us that would know, in spite of the pain that might come with the true knowledge. Okay, I'm going to turn now to another prolific thinker, a modern day thinker. His name is Ken Wilber. He writes quite convincingly and beautifully of the Oedipus myth, about the Oedipus myth, in his book Up from Eden, which I will be quoting here. So, first, I want to say that he sees this, he sees this Oedipus myth play out in terms of the evolution of the human species writ large and in an individual's own life. He agrees with Fromm, as far as I can tell, that it's a myth concerning the matriarchy, the old matriarchal order, and the patriarchal order. However, he has a very different idea than Fromm about what successful resolution is, what successful transcendence of the myth or advancement through the myth is. So I'm going to be reading a little bit here, so bear with me. Ken writes that Oedipus rebels against the father principle, which demands more awareness, and he seeks instead reunion with the mother, comfort with the mother, emotional incest with the mother, or immersion in her domain. So he turns away from the father and he goes towards the mother. He kills his father and he returns to his mother. So Oedipus for Ken is not a hero, because he succumbs to the matriarchal domain, the domain of the mother. This means that he doesn't make the final transformation from, in Ken's words, body to mind, from instinct to ego, from pleasure to reason, but instead he returns to all of that. He falls back into the desire for pleasure, instinctual desire for pleasure, for bodily pleasure. So he regresses. He regresses back to the warm embrace of Mother Earth. So upon regressing, he suffers the tragic fate that, as Ken puts it, all consorts of the mother have, which is castration, sacrifice, dismemberment, as we see as evidenced by him poking out his eyes. For Ken, it's interesting that he pierces his eyes. His eyes are symbolic of knowledge, of light, and of reason, of the father principle for Ken. And so he destroys that, his own potential individuality, his own rational ego mind. So that is what Ken says. And for Ken, this is the complex. Somebody with an Oedipal problem is wanting to return to the body, to the oral stages, or the anal or the phallic, to the body stages. They want to they're unconsciously seeking security by a return to an all-loving, all-providing mother, a world where they themselves are not responsible. So that's his take. Interesting. So last thing, for him, Oedipus is a victim. He's the last great victim. He's the last great potential hero who couldn't make it. I'm going to quickly talk about one other take here. on the Oedipus complex. It comes from Deleuze and Guattari, Frenchmen. I believe one was a psychologist, maybe one was a sociologist, and maybe the mid 20th century. Um, I think that they're in agreement here, at least to an extent, with Don, that children, they direct their desire at the mother, towards the mother, who's uh, kept out of their reach by the father, and the result is identification with the father. They say that the result is a passive individual subject who will turn up to work, obey the boss, compete with the neighbors, and consume an endless stream of commodities. That psychoanalysis plays the role of the police force of this world order. Um, those who do not succumb to it, who do not play by the rules, are tracked down and then reformed in the image of the good child and the good worker. So this is a little bit what Don was talking about, I think, where uh, successful resolution in the vein of Freud's thinking just means really bowing down before the social order that be, before the father uh, masculine principle. Um, it's essentially saying, I won't be a threat to you anymore. I won't challenge your dominion. I won't challenge your reign. Whatever you say, I will do. I will model myself after you. I will try to become you, but not to surpass you. Um, I'll let you guide me, and I'll serve as sort of your tool until perhaps others serve as mine, but all within that same social order. So I think that these analysts would agree that truly successful resolution would look like symbolically killing the father, symbolically transcending the father. So I'll leave that there.